Hello, all, and welcome to a new episode of the Horror Countdown podcast. I'm your host, Don Anelli, and tonight I'm joined by one third of the Watch Out horror movie review. So please welcome Jason.
Hey Don, how's it going? It's nice to be here.
It's great to finally be here. It's great to finally have you on board. I've been a fan of your show for a while now, so it's great to finally talk to you.
Well, that's very cool to hear. Actually, I appreciate that. I do have to apologize that you've got like the one host that is probably the least funny of the three of us, but I'll do my best here tonight.
Well, I'll settle for at least one third of that, but yeah, for tonight's episode, we have chosen our top 10 horror comedies. So this was your selection. So a little bit of about why the topic, any concessions during your list. Not that what films you chose, but like the process and anything like that.
Well, the process was crazy, I have to say. Like
Uh,
I,
oh, I can
I
definitely confirm mine was as well, but that's for my part.
there's just so many choices, right? Like
Exactly.
I sat down at first and came up with a list of about 45 of them off the top of my head. And quite a few too that I hadn't had a chance to watch yet. So I did quite a bit of homework. I went through and did a lot of rewatching, and I added a couple from the my must watch list. Um, but I found an interesting thing, which is that when I was rewatching these horror comedies, a lot of the time they dropped on my list upon a rewatch. And I think that's kind of a unique thing with a horror comedy because maybe that first experience, you know, because it's new and you haven't, and it takes you by surprise, has a lot to do with the enjoyment of the movie. So there's a couple of movies that I thought were going to be battling it out for number one and number two spot, and they ended up not even in my top 10.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of similar. Mine, I am generally not much of a big rewatcher of horror comedies. I'm basically kind of like a one and done kind of a person, just so that way, like a lot of the stuff stays fresh. Because I think that's like the big thing with the genre is that it's got to be, fresh for the joke to land.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I would say I am a fan. Like I don't turn myself away from them just because I hear it's being sold as a horror comedy. But yeah, no, I'm not much of like, a constant genre rewatcher. Like I don't really, spend a lot of my time going back and forth and rediscovering the older ones. I'm basically just, I'll see it maybe once or twice and then I'll just leave it at that. But the top couple choices I have are ones that I have rewatched constantly and at a pretty consistent clip. But generally speaking, most of these maybe either one and done kind of a thing, or I've seen it at least. I've seen it at least once. Some of these I've maybe only seen twice, but that's about it.
Yeah, and I had to make a decision too. Is this going to be a top 10 list of recommendations that that I would take really seriously in terms of identifying the best of the genre, or is this going to reflect more of my personality and what I really enjoy the most? Because there is quite a difference between those two lists, and I did go with my own personal favorites for this list.
Yeah, I kind of was the same way. So, and, there's a couple on here that I do have as kind of a, they're on there for a reason, so they have to be, included at some point. But generally speaking, if it's on the list, it's probably because one, I'm a big fan of the film, but it's also one that I think is good enough that people should seek it out and watch if they claim to be, a person that says, they like horror comedies. So
Yeah.
yeah, I kind of did a little bit of both.
So, what do you think about kind of the horror community's opinions on horror comedy? Like, it seems to be a very divisive subject, right? Like, there are some people that really don't appreciate them.
Yeah, I try not to get into a lot of debates just to save myself a lot of useless typing. Just because, like you said, it's what I find funny doesn't necessarily mean that you have to find it funny, kind of a thing. So I try to like balance that aspect of it, but yeah, generally, I do see that there's a lot of times people are harsher on films because they're supposedly a comedy, and a lot of the times, one of the big damning arguments that they'll use against it is, "Oh, and by the way, I didn't find it funny, so therefore it sucks."
Yeah,
So it's kind of like one of those where, yeah, maybe they'll have like two or three like legitimate gripes about it, but then they'll throw that, "Oh, and by the way, I didn't think it was funny," as kind of like a cherry on top, as kind of like defining their stance on the film. So
right. Everybody's sense of humor is so unique and personal, right? So that's to be expected. I,
yeah, yeah.
I
I mean, there's times where I've said, I like a certain type of film, and then I'll see another film in the exact same style, and it just won't work for me. So I don't know. I mean, there's points where it works for me, and sometimes it doesn't. Like one time, I'll watch like a really highbrow kind of like I'll for instance, I'll say like I watch like a slapstick comedy, or one that's just like goofy and bonkers and off the wall and just like crazy, and then I'll watch another film that's exactly the same style, and it'll be like, oh, that's not all that good, I don't even understand why I'm watching it, kind of a thing. So yeah, it definitely depends, I would say. I mean, it's kind of like I think it's like the most I would say it's like the pickiest subject for me. Like, just because one film in that particular style of comedy worked for me doesn't mean that all of the films in that particular style will work for me. But yeah, to me it really depends, I would say.
yeah. Well, there's a couple on my list that I think a big problem that a lot of people have is that they'll think that the movie is making fun of the horror genre, and a lot of the times it is making fun of the horror genre, but it's making fun of the horror genre because they love the horror genre, and they're pointing out the things that make horror so entertaining on many different levels. And so that's how I choose to look at these a little bit, and definitely some of my choices will reflect those kind of movies too.
Yeah. um I got much else to add, so are we ready to start in on our list?
I'm all set.
All right, so let's start off with your number 10.
All right, my number 10. Um, I've been very lucky with starting the podcast about a year ago because we've ended up watching a lot of movies that I never would have found otherwise, and there's a good handful of horror comedies in there that I think flew under a lot of people's radar. And I wanted number 10 to reflect the best of those. And for me, that is 2015's Deathgasm. I don't know if you've heard of this one before.
It should be Deathgasm because lowercase is for pussies.
Yeah, there you go. If Slice and Dice and Dave was on here, it'd be something like Deathgasm. But
I tried, but I'd rather save my vocal cords for listing stuff off rather than attempting a death metal voice. But that works for me.
there you go. There you go. So written and directed by Jason Howden. This is a New Zealand produced movie, and it's about an outcast at high school who is a heavy metal fan who finds a soulmate in Zach, another student. So the story revolves around Brody, who's played by Milo Cawthorn. Zach is played by James Joshua Blake, and they start a heavy metal band. And unfortunately, they find some they find the music to the Black Hymn, which, if you play it backwards, turns anybody around it into, you know, violent violent zombie-like ghouls. And so you're dealing with, the central joke of this movie is that heavy metal music will corrupt and turn people into violent ghouls. So this happens quite literally to spectacular effect with quite a bit of over-the-top gore. But what works the best for me is just going back to those characters. So um, Brody, uh, it turns out that the hottest girl in school is very attracted to Brody and is very interested in heavy metal music as well. And so this is kind of like that feel good story for the heavy metal nerds among us that just wanted to get the girl and just wanted to be in a successful band, and maybe not so much the part about the violent ghouls and everything that comes after that. But I found this to be a very entertaining movie, even without the dildo fight in there, which was you got to see it to believe it. So um, it's got a re-beheading scene in it, which it's kind of hard to explain, but again, something you just have to see. I wish this had. They were talking about making a sequel to this. It hasn't happened, but I would be all over that if it came out. So this is 2015's Deathgasm.
Nice. I will give you away a little slight spoiler right now. It is on my list at a later spot, so I'll refer my thoughts about it then.
Awesome.
So yeah, I think we'll just carry on like that. Where if we happen across duplicates, then we'll just say that when we're done. So
Sure.
yeah. All right. So like I said, I'll mention my thoughts about that when I come across it. But my number 10 is another recent one. I'm usually not a fan of a lot of modern horror comedies, but this one works for me. This is 2019's Little Monsters.
Okay. I haven't seen this one.
Okay, so it's kind of in a similar vein. It's also shot in New Zealand. It involves a young guy who's basically on. He's also kind of in the band, but he's a little. He's not a metalhead. He's just more of a quote unquote rock star kind of a personality. And his girlfriend dumps him. He loses his job, and he's basically kicked out of the band, like worst case scenario kind of a day. And to get him out of the dumps, his sister asks him to take her son to his class field trip. And it turns out that the class field trip is to a petting zoo that's located next to a next to a which like a military base that was experimenting with a virus that ends up getting unleashed and turns everybody into zombies. So the entire joke of the film is the fact that the two adults have to make the children realize that the zombies are trying to play games with them. So it's always, like trying to play tag to like play keep away. And they try to, keep the kids safe, but the kids are already in on what's going on. They know. But the two adults are the ones that are trying to, keep the kids smiling and try to like make sure that they don't get traumatized. But there's also a secondary joke that is absolutely hysterical in that they have a character. I wish I could remember his name because it's been a while since I've seen it, but it's played by Josh Gad, the guy who plays the voice of Olaf in the Frozen franchise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he plays a children's performer who is absolutely despicable. He basically uses it as an excuse to get with the single milfs in the crowd. That's the entire reason that he's a children's performer. He hates kids. He can't sing. He can't dance. He has no musical talent whatsoever, but he's basically using it as an excuse to score with free women.
Nice.
So they call him out on it, and he basically just turns into a despicable jerk the entire film. And the three of them have to try to keep the kids safe from the zombies, but again, the kids know what's going on. So it's just kind of like this weird It's like this weird thing where like the adults are trying to like put on a happy face, kids. We're trying to play tag. Don't let them touch you. And the kids are like, do they not know that this is a zombie invasion? Why are we playing tag with them? So it's kind of one of those kinds of things, and it's hysterical. It's probably, like I said, one of the only times that I'll ever find Taylor Swift tolerable, and that's an in joke that you'll have to know when you watch the movie.
All right. It's funny how often how little parents know about their kids becomes the focus of comedy, right? Like there really is gold there,
Yeah.
and it's also funny how many of these movies happen to involve zombies in one way or the other. Maybe that's a slight spoiler too,
Mm.
but yeah, I haven't heard of that one. I'm gonna put that on my watch list for sure.
Yeah. It should be on Hulu because I think it was a Hulu original.
Okay.
So it should be on there. I mean, if it's not an original, it was definitely I think partially funded if I remember right. So I think it's one of those that's going to be on there for a while, and there's like no danger of it like being taken off or something. So yeah, if you have Hulu, I think this is it should be on there, or at least relatively easy to find.
Yeah, I'll have to find it some other way since up here in Canada we don't actually get Hulu, but
Mm.
that's the bane of my
Oh,
existence a
that's
lot of the
right.
time.
Yeah, you guys are Canadian. I forgot about that.
Yeah,
There may be a physical release. I could swear I've seen a copy of it online, so maybe that would probably be a better route since you don't have it. But don't quote me on that. I'm not entirely sure.
I'm sure I'll be able to find it somewhere.
Yeah, there's always that. But that gives way to number 9.
All right, so number 9. Um, I have no idea if this is going to be a controversial one or not because it's another recent one, and I think it's the end of my really recent ones. But it's one that I read the synopsis on Netflix, and I didn't think too much about it. But Slice and Dice and Dave really likes this one, and when I watched it, I fell in love with it too. This is 2017's The Babysitter, uh, directed by Mick G, which surprised me a lot actually when I did the research and found that. Um, I guess I can see the comparisons to Charlie's Angels and things like that, but um, again, this is this is another movie that's really based on the relationships between the characters, and how much you enjoy it is going to depend on how much you relate to the character of Cole, played by Judah Lewis. He's a kid he's outgrown his need for a babysitter, but his babysitter is smoking hot, so he still has a babysitter. His babysitter's name is B. She's played by Samara Weaving, and I absolutely love the job that Samara Weaving does in this movie. It's uh, to me, it's a stunning performance. Just walking that line between, um, you know, someone that you really care for and someone that you are scared of. And so I guess I should get into the synopsis here, but um, essentially when Cole decides Cole decides to stay up past his bedtime while his babysitter is looking after him, and he finds out that his babysitter is a member of a satanic cult who is performing a ritual in his living room while he's supposedly asleep. And when she finds out that he's seen too much, it does not make her happy, and she's going to go through anything to try to keep him quiet. So I really like the cast of characters, like I said, but especially Robbie Amell as Max. He's a guy that's part of the satanic cult, and just the way that he's such a caricature of a jock type character, but he sees something worth, he sees the worth in Cole even if Cole doesn't see it, so he's trying to build him up even as he's chasing him down and trying to kill him, and it's done in such a comedic way that it feels so natural. um it's a movie that, there's quite a bit of gore in there as well, and it really makes you wonder what this girl B's motivation is, and how we could, as an audience, have been so wrong about her as well. But it's loaded with pretty funny one-liners and amazing comedic situations, and it's something that I had a lot of fun with. So this is 2017's The Babysitter.
Yeah, I am a big fan of this one as well. I love the relationship. There's so many just bizarre offbeat one-liners, and I had so much fun with that one. It didn't really make my list because I see it more as a straight film with just jokes, even though the jokes are hysterical. But I am not mad at all with that pick. I had a lot of fun with it too. So
Yeah, I think that when I was worried it would be controversial, I'm thinking, some of the ones that I left off my list, and people might look
mhm.
at this and say, "Really, you think The Babysitter is better than those ones?" But that's going to happen no matter what. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not mad at it. I just yeah, whatever. But I mean, yeah, I love the film too. So I'm definitely not mad at that one.
cool.
So yeah, my number nine is I would probably go. I'm not entirely sure, like I said, where this kind of falls in line with the genre. I mean, yeah, I could probably say it's a straightforward film with just tons of jokes and bizarre situations, or it could just be what would be it could be like a parody that's played straight in the third act. But I went with 2004's Club Dread.
All right, nice.
Yeah. So this is produced by the Broken Lizard team. You'll recognize them for films like Super Troopers, Slam and Salmon, Beer Fest, a couple of other stuff. But they also went ahead and they did this film, which is actually really fun, really fun. Some basic premise is a group of workers at a well, I'm trying to be kind of I'm trying to beat around the bush. It's basically it's an open secret that it's basically a sex resort in the Caribbean, but they try to play it off as a tropical resort and retreat kind of a thing. But everybody there is just basically, everybody there is just interested in getting laid, getting high, or getting drunk. So everybody there, including the staff and the workers, are there to do one of the three things. So there's no real secret about it. But eventually, what happens is they come to find out that they're being killed off one by one, and they have to find out why. Um, I had so much fun with this. I saw this one actually before I saw Super Troopers. I didn't really think much of them when I first saw it. I didn't know who they were. I came across this just because it was being marketed as a horror film, and I thought it was, something to watch. So I went into this kind of not knowing who they were, and I came out of this the biggest fan of the five of them because there's five guys in the troop. I am not going to attempt to name names because my English, my American is not going to butcher their foreign names all too well. So let's just say there's five guys. Most of them are foreign, and I'm not attempting to name them. But they basically are forced into a series of slasher tropes. There's basically tons of red herrings. Everybody's got a motive at some point to be the killer, but it's absolutely gut busting hysterical, some of the situations that goes on in here. I haven't even mentioned the fact that the resort is basically the playground of a Jimmy Haggart type of a folk singer, who's played by Bill Paxton of all people. And he is hysterical in this. I just find everything that comes out of his mouth just it had me in stitches when he came on. I mean, I knew he was in the film, but everything he says in this is just gold. And they try to play it off like it's serious. They try to play off that the deaths are serious, and there's a bunch of gore and all the murders, but it's so much fun. The costume with the killer is hysterical. They keep on switching up the various disguises to try to throw suspicion off of who everybody is. Some of the situations are ludicrous, and they're just you expect them to buy it. And I have so much fun with this movie. It's one of my favorites. I couldn't keep it higher on the list, but yeah, this was a hard one to leave off. Number 9 is Club Dread.
Nice. Now, I did see this one way back in the day, probably around 2005 or 6-ish. So it's been a long time, and maybe that's why I didn't have it on my list. But
Mm.
yeah, I do remember it vaguely, and it's probably worth a revisit. But yeah, I was hoping that you would mention Bill Paxton's name because I did remember he was in it, and I was searching for his name in my head. So
It's a fruit. It's a fruit because they come on, brain work. That's what I have you for. Coconut Pete. There it is. Coconut Pete.
Coconut
Because I was trying to play the lyrics back to one of the songs. For some reason, I had one of the songs in my head, and they mentioned it, Coconut Pete.
Gotcha. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I'm a big Bill Paxton fan, and so yeah, I did remember that he was in there.
yeah, yeah. It's definitely worth the revisit, especially if it's been that long. So,
Cool.
yeah. Let's move on to number 8.
All right, I think this is where my list starts to get a little rocking here. This is taking us back to 1985, and it's interesting because you could see this as kind of a parody of zombie films that turned into something that really helped to define the tropes going forward. And so this is The Return of the Living Dead, by directed by Dan O'Bannon. Um, I mean, there's so many things in this movie that are iconic by now. The fact that the zombies talk and can get on the radio and ask the dispatchers for more paramedics and cops to be sent. The fact that the zombies run is something that I don't think had been done before at this point. And and the fact that they were going after people's brains in particular was something else. But I really, upon a rewatch, I was, I guess not surprised, but just impressed that they tied it into the original Night of the Living Dead the way they did, to the point that that kind of explains why it's called The Return of the Living Dead. Because what happens here is that in this movie's universe, the events of Night of the Living Dead actually happened, and um, the the undead that were recovered from that scene were shipped by the military, but the shipment got lost and it ended up in the basement of this medical supply uh, warehouse that just happens to be within walking distance to a crematorium, mortuary, and a graveyard. But when two employees of the medical supply warehouse, uh, well, when one employee of the medical supply warehouse is trying to show off to the new hire, they accidentally open up one of these containers full of old zombie, and the gas gets around, and all of a sudden you've got a zombie apocalypse on the rise. So over the top gore with this one. Some amazing effects. I mean, the Tar Man zombie, as he's referred to, the way he moves is just amazing. The way they did that. Um, I have to call out the performances of, well, the performance of Tom Matthews as Freddy. He, of course, went on to play Tommy Jarvis in Friday the 13th Part 6. So that's where you would recognize him from. But also Linnea Quigley's performance as Trash in this is quite something to behold as well. So yeah, just visually visually, so much is going on in this movie. It's all played, you know, like I said, it kind of feels like the parody of a zombie movie, but it turned into such an influential zombie movie itself. So that's why that's my number 8.
Nice. I'm a big fan of the film. I just as a comedy, I'm not really sure where a lot of the jokes are, because it's one of the weird ones where I'm kind of in a similar vein. I don't know if this one was be on your list, so don't tell me. But I kind of feel like this the same way I do like with the Howling, where a lot of what everybody says are jokes. I don't think are. So I don't really laugh at the film. So it's kind of one of those weird ones where I absolutely love the film, but I personally I don't see the comedy in it. I actually find the second one funnier. The second one to me is actually a much more horror comedy than the original. So I mean I get why you would say the original. It's just one of those where for me personally, I'm one where I don't find that what are being called as jokes, I don't find funny. So I mean, like I said, I don't know if the Howling is on your list or not, but I mean, I kind of think about both of them in the same manner.
Yeah, and that's completely fair. I mean, it's something that, like we said off the top, the everyone's sense of humor is different, and you know, eh, I think there's going to be a couple more on this list that might have the same reaction. So it'll be interesting to see. Specifically, there's another one that is very much like this, and I think what it is um, there's a lot of overacting when it comes to this movie. Like
Yeah,
everybody
yeah,
plays it.
a lot of the stuff in the warehouse, I think.
Yeah, like they're just, they're they. I don't know if people actually behave the way they behave, and I think it's more to just it's like the decisions they make just kind of compound on each other and make things worse and worse and worse, and so in that way it's
Yeah,
kind of like a black comedy sort of thing, but
yeah,
but yeah, I mean, it's not like anybody's saying one-liners. Um,
right, yeah.
Not really, but and it's not so much a laugh out loud thing, but yeah, it's to me, I look at it and I definitely see the humor in the situation.
Cool. I mean, yeah, like I said, I mean, I'm a huge fan. It's one of those where what I'm being told is jokes I don't find funny. So, but yeah, uh, move on to my number eight. My number eight. I'm gonna take a very, very, very strong leap here. And I'm gonna say that you've never heard of this one.
All right, let's see.
Okay, I'm going also with 1985, coincidentally enough, but not zombies, not from America. I'm going with Hong Kong's Mr. Vampire.
I think you win the bet. I've never heard of that one.
All right, so yeah, this is a film I saw several years ago when I went into a major Asian horror kick. For those that don't know, one of my side gigs is I actually write for a website known as Asian Movie Pulse, and I'm pretty much the horror guy on the site. Everybody else there loves dramas or historical martial arts movies and that kind of stuff. And I'm kind of the guy that just does all the sleazy, trashy Asian horror stuff. So this was one of the films that I saw when I got into Asian horror. For like I said, like most of you haven't seen this, so real quickly, what happens in the film is a Buddhist is a Taoist priest and his two assistants are charged with moving a body that was buried at this one estate to a separate burial ground. Now, there's a lot more going on than that, but that's like the general gist of what's going on. But what happens is the two assistants, who are the ones that are normally in charge of the body while the priest is off doing his manners and doing with all of his other customs and stuff like that, they fail to realize that the body that was buried is actually a vampire. And they end up and they inadvertently set it loose and it begins roaming the countryside. But what everybody, what nobody else realizes is there's two or three other secret clandestine meetings going on behind the scenes that are basically setting everything up to come to fruition, that they want the vampire there for a reason. And I'm trying not to, you can probably tell I'm being a little hesitant here because I'm trying not to delve too deeply into spoilers. So I realize that this doesn't really sound funny, but if you're a fan of 80s era Jackie Chan movies, this is a horror film that Jackie Chan would have made. He would have been either the priest or he would have been one of the two assistants. So imagine that kind of goofy slapstick comedy. There's a scene where they're parading the body around the village, and they stop to go in, and one of the assistants has to go to relieve himself in the bathroom. So they've decided it's the perfect time to pull a prank on him by pretending to dress up as a ghost and scaring him out of the outhouse. Or there's another scene where, through a series of miscommunications, they end up coming to believe that the waitress at a restaurant is actually a prostitute begging for their services. So it's kind of, I mean, a lot of it, may be lost in translation, but I was just absolutely hysterical with this one here. It feels exactly like a Jackie Chan action film. It's not necessarily a very strong horror film, despite there being a vampire in it. I mean, that's kind of like one of the few failings, is that even though there's a vampire and there's other clandestine things going on, it kind of it it could be said as bordering on the genre. But if you go into it wanting to see what a Jackie Chan horror film would be, this is the one. And like I said, if I not giving away that this is a Jackie Chan style movie didn't clue you in that there's jaw-dropping fights in this, then that's another big selling point with this one, because it's the same style of fighting that goes on in his films that you'd see in this one. So, people are flying all over the room. They're, using the weapons to their advantage, and even the vampires know martial arts. So it's not just the humans fighting inanimate vampires with their martial arts. It's basically as if you have you have two martial art kung fu masters going at each other. It's just one's dressed like a vampire and one's dressed like a human. So yeah, I absolutely love this one. I know it's almost impossible to find. um I don't remember where I saw it, because I saw it years ago, but it's out there if you can find it. So, I mean, like I said, I know that this is not one that a lot of people have seen, but yeah, this one was, I had to put this one on my list.
Well, that's what's great about lists like this is you end up with a lot of great recommendations to go search out and experience yourself. And you've got me intrigued for sure, because
Hmm.
I know that some of these films can be quite crazy. So um, Jackie Chan style vampires, I'm in.
Cool. All right. So let's move to number 7.
Number 7. All right, so for my number 7, I'm going to go with the number 2 movie of a trilogy, and this is from 1987. Also, kind of a zombie demon movie, but possibly one of the most famous cult classics, and that is Evil Dead 2. So this is directed by Sam Raimi, starring Bruce Campbell. Um, it's interesting how they did this trilogy, because none of the movies really pick up where the previous one left off exactly. Like, it's close enough, but it's not quite. And so some people see Evil Dead 2 as being a remake rather than a true sequel to the first Evil Dead. And I suppose you could look at it that way. You could also look at it as, that Ash was kind of dumb enough to go back to the same cabin and bring someone else with him this time. But I think the majority of, the effects are very effective. The sound design of the first two Evil Dead movies is just crazy. Like, that's what unsettles you the most, and it makes it actually a very scary movie. But what makes it a comedy is Bruce Campbell's performance, and it's a lot of the time it's the physical comedy. Like, I see him as like the king of physical horror comedy. Just the scenes with the possessed hand, how it's dragging him across the kitchen. The scene in the mirror where the mirror image is attacking him. And yeah, just top to bottom, this is a crazy film. It improves on the original in quite a few ways, and sets up for what is probably more true comedy than horror in the Army of Darkness, the third movie, which was one that I was also considering for my list, but for me it was more like an action adventure comedy than a true horror. So I decided to go with the second as the best representation of a horror comedy for this trilogy. So yeah, that's Bruce Campbell, Sam Raimi, Evil Dead 2, 1987.
Nice. It is on my list, so we will be talking about it shortly.
All right, moving on.
Yeah. So my number 7 is Deathgasm, or I should say Deathgasm. Like I said, lowercase is for pussies.
There we go.
Yeah. Oh my God! When I first saw this movie, I had literally thought I had made a movie made literally just for me. For one thing, I know every single band in the movie. I know all of the music that was in there. I actually own most of the albums that they played.
Wow, and they went kind of obscure with a lot of that stuff too, right?
Yeah. A lot of it is Canadian underground and indie stuff. Probably being cheaper to like source, and like you can like license the stuff from them a little easier.
I would imagine so, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I was sold on this the very second that they did the music video, and I'll tell you why. The music video, and this is something that very few people don't know, it is a shot-for-shot recreation of a music video from a band called Immortal. And Immortal are basically a Norwegian black metal band, but they are renowned as being jokes to the entire community, because what they did is the music video up until the point where he starts humping the sword. But okay, if you remember the video, the one that they shoot in the woods where they're running around the trees and they look like they're just throwing leaves all over the place and they're just like bending out and they have like that spooky makeup and they're trying to look intimidating.
Yep.
All of that is shot for shot remake of one of their videos.
That's
So
hilarious.
So yeah, the second I saw that, I was in love with the movie. And then you get the re-beheading sequence, and I could not stop laughing. I had literally stopped the movie, and I had to wait to stop. I had to stop and go back and watch what I had missed, because I could not stop laughing when that happens.
Wait.
And
Does that mean that you rewatched the re-beheading scene? So it's like the
exactly, that was
re-beheading scene?
That was the joke I was going for. Yeah,
Sorry, I took that one away from you, but nice
that's
setup.
a no worries. Yeah, I mean, rewatching a re-beheading. Yeah. Yeah, when I first saw this, I thought this movie was made exactly for me. It's not just, like you said, it's not just the physical comedy, it's not just the outlandishness. There's also a heart to it. There's a story to it, and the idea of him overcoming, his slacker origins and finding it, within himself to be the hero that his girlfriend wants to be. And like I said, she's just as much of a badass as he is because he takes them on by herself at some point.
Yep.
So yeah, I love that about it. I love the gore. I love just the sheer outlandishness. The music is impeccable. The jokes are spot on. Yeah, I was a fan of this movie when I first saw it too. So um, yeah, I'm right there with you. This is one of the better genre films of the past decade, I would say.
Well, there you go. Yeah, neither of us yet have mentioned the ice cream cone scene, that
Uh,
park bench scene.
oh yeah. Yeah, for those that don't know, the perfect epitome of the film is the famous still shot where it's shortly after they filmed the music video. So the kid is completely decked out in what is termed corpse paint. Basically, you paint your face completely white, and you draw like black symbols or designs or like various different you basically have like different symbols and designs on your face. And he's wearing a black shirt, black chains, leather studs and spikes and all that. And he's packing up this stuff, and he meets the girl who's dressed like this preppy cheerleader kind, with like the bright pink and the short dress and all that. And she basically invites him out to ice cream. So the shot in particular is the two of them sitting on a bench eating ice cream, but the juxtaposition is he's wearing this dark black corpse paint and full metal attire, and she looks like she stepped out of a 1950s cheerleader movie.
Yep.
And yeah, it's heartwarming what they go through, but just the visual when you first see it, because it's a slam cut the second you see it, because they're packing up. She says, "Hey, you want to go get ice cream?" And then it snap cuts to them on the park bench, licking their cones, and yeah, I was dying.
Yeah, my co-host Grave Robber Jeff calls that the best scene in the world. So he was a big fan of that.
Yeah, um, yeah, for good reasons. So we'll move from there and go to number six.
Number 6. All right. Just make sure that I've got it in the right order. All right. Okay, so my number 6 is what I would consider one of the bigger budget ones, if not the biggest budget one on my list. It's from 2011. It's definitely a referential parody of horror movies in general, and I think that sometimes rubs people the wrong way, but I really appreciated it, especially the first time I saw it. Second time I saw it, it held up very well as well. This is The Cabin in the Woods, written and directed, well, directed by Drew Goddard, written by Drew Goddard and Joss Whedon. Whatever we think of Joss Whedon these days, I love this movie. Um, the very first scene, like you start this one up and you're expecting a cabin in the woods, and the very first scene is you're in a sterile, weird office space with the guy from The West Wing, and you're like, did my disc get switched or did I hit the wrong button on my streaming service? But it gets you off balance right off the start. And the general conceit of this movie is that what we think are just horror movies are actually being manipulated for reasons that you'll find out later. So we have the typical group of kids that go off for a cabin in the woods vacation. Among them is Chris Hemsworth in a pre-Thor role, which is pretty fun to see. Um, and yeah, so they're, you know, throughout their trip, they start to, their characterization starts to change from being, one guy who's kind of a scholarly guy starts acting more like the jock, and one girl starts acting more kind of slutty, and they're kind of confused by what's going on. And we get to watch the guys in the office space. I mentioned Bradley Whitford. um, he's also joined by Richard Jenkins, and it's this whole thing that this trip, this group of kids, is being manipulated somehow, and we're not quite sure why. And I think the best scene the scene that really I think about whenever I think about this movie is as they're exploring the basement of this cabin, and they're looking at all these artifacts. And once you find out why what they're doing is important, I just really like that. So um, you get some murderous zombie hillbillies in this movie, but it doesn't stop there. There's some crazy stuff near the end. There's a great cameo that comes up at the end that I'm not sure that I should ruin, because it really is very cool. Um, but yeah, I think the fact this movie just sets itself up to say that there's a method to the madness of horror movies. I just really appreciated what they did with this. So that's 2011's The Cabin in the Woods.
Wow. I'm kind of the same way as I said about Return of the Living Dead as I am with this one. As much as I love it, I don't. I when I first watched it, I didn't know it was a comedy, and I never thought of it as such. So yeah, yeah,
It's not laugh out loud comedy like
yeah,
like we were talking about before, for sure. It's more, it's more situational, I guess, and how you interpret
yeah.
that. But
Yeah, I mean, I can understand a lot of, like the two controllers, a lot of their banter, especially when we realize what the banter is about. A lot of that is kind of like, chuckle inducing, but it's never really. I always looked at it more as like, moments of brevity just to kind of like lighten the tension. But yeah, it was weird. I've watched it several times, and it's just one it- again, I don't really know. I The first time I watched it, I'll be honest, I didn't know it was a comedy. And then a lot of the times later, I think it's because I'm stuck in that mindset of I didn't know, so it's not really funny.
yeah, it's funny because, well, I don't mean funny, but it's what's interesting in this whole exercise is that I think there's elements of comedy in almost every horror movie. I mean, some there's none whatsoever, but I think the general rule is that there's at least a little bit. And so when we're defining what is a horror comedy or a comedy horror, I think that line is a very, like, there's definitely a huge gray area. So um, yeah, it's interesting because I think if we got like 10, 20, 100 people, we would have very different lists even then.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Probably be the only one that wouldn't have that on the list, but definitely a fun experiment.
Yeah,
Ah,
never know. Never know.
yeah. Well, moving on to my number six. I went with a another rather recent one. Probably one that's a lot more beloved than most other horror comedies. I went with Tucker and Dale versus Evil.
Nice.
Yeah. So, 2010. This one concerns a pair of friends who are heading down to their shack out in the woods. They're just looking for a fun retreat, and they come across a group of partiers who are looking to have some fun. But they manage to inadvertently suspect that the two brothers are serial killers out to murder and eat them. and they spend the entire time trying to prove it with disastrous results. I will leave that vague plot description as much as I can, because a lot of this one is based on the situation at hand. So the the general premise is that the two friends who are, obviously Tucker and Dale, they are completely unaffected by what's going on around them. They suspect nothing is wrong. They're only there just to, relax, unwind, have a, fun trip. And what goes on is the other group of people, the college group that are there for their own weekend, they're trying to prove that the two guys are cannibals. And unfortunately, several miscommunications and inadvertent situational responses later, they're all on the run from each other. But everything that they do ends up only hurting the group of college students. The other two, Tucker and Dale, are completely unaffected by everything, and it's only at the very end that they realize what's actually going on. And this was a surprise. I didn't know it was out until several years later, and a friend of mine at work who, he knew I was a big horror fan, and he was like curious about a lot of the stuff that I was watching, and he asked me about it, and I had never heard of it, so I went ahead and checked it out. And yeah, this was a ton of fun. It's heartwarming, it's funny, it's probably a bit more over the top than what you would expect in this kind of a film, but the situations are just hysterical. There's so much to like here, especially the two leads, Tucker and Dale. I always get the actors mixed up. I know that it's Alan Tiddick and Tyler Labine, but I always forget who's who.
Yeah, I think Tyler Labine is Dale.
Okay, yeah.
Is that right?
I don't know. I mean, I know who Alan Tiddick is, and I know who I know who they are as actors, but I can never remember the characters. Which one's Tucker and which one's Dale? So that's my issue, is that I know the actors, but I don't have a way to confirm that whoever Tiddick is playing is Tucker, and whoever, um I mean, I don't know if, Tiddick is playing Tucker or if Tiddick is playing Dale. Like, that's the thing for me. Like, I know who they are. I know who each of the people are, but I don't know the characters. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
you're making me doubt my memory now too.
I know that's the thing, is like I know who they are. I can't like for 100% attach a name to the face. So, but yeah, like I said, everything that happens here is basically just miscommunications and misreading the situation. So expect scenes where people are running away, they're running up on him trying to, get the jump on him, and he'll dodge at the last second, and they'll inadvertently be poised into a position where it would look like they're being murdered, only it's the exact opposite. I mean, again, I'm trying to dance gingerly around spoilers the best I can. So, again, apologies if this stuff doesn't sound as funny as it actually is, but um, yeah, this is hysterical. And if you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor and watch it, because if it's not just the physical comedy that's on display, at least watch the heartwarming story that takes place, because that's one of the film's shining moments. Is, I think, the relationship between the two whoever they are. I mean, I know it's Tucker and Dale, but whoever the two of them are, their chemistry together is impeccable, and that sells the film just as much as the gut busting comedy.
Yep. Well, let me add to that, but I'm going to add to that later. Let's just put it that way.
All right, cool. Let's switch over and go to our top fives then.
All right, this is getting exciting. Okay, so for my number 5 pick, um, you've got me wondering. Well, I'm looking at all these now, thinking, okay, well, I think they're still comedies. Let's see. Um, my number 5 pick is Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon from 2006. This is written and directed by Scott Glosserman, also written by David J. Steve. This is set up as a documentary, kind of half handheld, so not really found footage, but some of the footage is handheld. As we're following Leslie Vernon, we're with the documentary. No, we're with the documentarians. That's a long word, geez. And as they follow Leslie Vernon around as he's preparing for his big night, and he's returned to town after being assumed dead years and years ago, and he's going to have one of these slasher uh, episodes. So he's in training, he's doing his cardio, he's explaining to the documentarians how he does his stalking and how he sets up, the the initial meetings between himself in the bushes and his targets, and how he chooses his targets, and while this is going on, this documentary crew headed up by um, Taylor Gentry is the character's name. She's played by Angela Gatels. This was a name I had trouble with pronouncing last time I talked about this movie. Um, she's kind of like, I wonder why she's in that position, because she's very interested in what Leslie Vernon's doing, but she's also got a lot of moral quandary with what Leslie Vernon's doing, because Leslie Vernon is an extremely likable guy, both to her and to us as an audience. We really get behind him. We really, want to see this guy succeed, but at the same time, if he succeeds, a lot of people are going to die. And so I found this movie a very interesting examination of why we like horror movies in the first place, But the comedy from this comes from Leslie Vernon's character, just how, giddy he is about what he's doing, how seriously he takes it, but how, like, everything that they try to explain, how they deconstruct the horror genre, I found quite brilliant. And his support system too is made up of Scott Wilson as Eugene. Scott Wilson, of course, just passed away not so long ago, a few years ago. Great role on The Walking Dead. His wife is played by Bridget Newton. So these two are, kind of mentors, or the support system for Leslie, and it's the conversation between the three of them where they're trying to explain to Taylor just the history of slashers, and how the groundbreakers like Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger and Michael Myers, laid the groundwork for all the slashers that came after, and so this takes place in a universe where all these slashers are real people that happened in the distant past. So it's one of those nods to slasher horror in general. You can tell that the director really loves horror movies, definitely from watching this. Again, it's kind of like Cabin in the Woods, where it's the central joke here is that there's a method behind the madness to horror movies, and yeah, and throw in, of course, a starring turn by Robert Englund in essentially they call it the Ahab role. This is the Dr. Loomis type role, who's coming after Leslie, trying to stop the reign of terror, and also add in a pretty effective twist near the end. And you've got what I consider a great movie here. So that's my number 5, Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon.
Yeah, I can't disagree more. It made my honorable mentions. It didn't make my list, but I completely agree. I'm a huge fan of that film. Uh, what it does, a lot of the in jokes and the self genre referentials are far more clever than I ever would have ever dreamed of putting together. I mean, it's got a lot more intelligence behind it than a lot of people think. A lot of what he's saying, like you never think about how he puts it into words what he's doing. You have to. It makes you realize a lot of what what other slashers have to go through to do what they do. And yeah, I'm a huge fan of this one. It just missed my list, but I'm definitely a fan of this one as well.
That's cool. Yeah, and the thing about it too is we could get into such a good spoiler discussion on it too, because it the last act just flips on
Yeah,
its ear, and it just becomes that much more multi-layered. So
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can't recommend this one enough as well.
All right. So we'll move on to my number five. I went with one of my all-time favorites. Uh, Definitely one that I mentioned earlier that this is one that I've seen several times over. It's one that I don't really rewatch a lot of these ones, but this one is very much a rewatchable genre film. I went with Shaun of the Dead.
Nice.
Yeah. So 2004, Edgar Wright, he of Last Night of Soho fame. Basically, Sean, in this, played by Simon Pegg, is an aimless 30-year-old, 30-ish drifter who's basically just content to spend every day at the electronics store where he works. Doesn't think of moving up into management. He's just basically retail. Just wants to get his shift over with, go home and play video games and get high with his best friend who lives on his couch. Go, one day though well, apparently, I shouldn't say one day. I should say at the end of one day, because it takes him a while. He comes to find out that there's a zombie outbreak, and it's infected the city, and he's one of the few survivors. So he has to round up the few survivors, the friends of his that he knows who have also survived, and has to lead them to safety. Um, Much like what you were saying with slasher deconstruction, this one is zombie deconstruction. And again, much in the same way of how smart and clever it is, there's a lot more to this than a lot of people realize. A lot of the in jokes in here are based on zombie films, zombie tropes that a lot of people are familiar with, but they don't, they're not familiar of until they've been pointed out. And then it's more of an, oh yeah, that's what they were talking about kind of a thing. And that's mixed incredibly well with some of the best British humor I've ever seen. I'm not a huge fan of British comedy in general. I watch a few shows here and there, and I don't really get a lot of their comedy, but this one works for me. The jokes are fantastic. The physical comedy is top notch. The third act again takes a hard turn into more traditional genre fare, and it turns into this bloody, brutal, really fun gore fest. It still has a few, moments of levity here and there, but it's, the first two-thirds of this where it's all hysterical and gut busting, and I have so much fun with this. So, again, I'm kind of surprising what with my earlier comments on Return of the Living Dead. I am a huge zombie fan, so this absolutely works for me. Yeah, I can't say much more about it, but number five, Shaun of the Dead.
All right. Well, I'm glad you have this on your list because unfortunately it didn't make mine. Um, it was one that I thought was going to be there, quite honestly. And I had watched it for the first time, God, maybe 20 years ago. Is it that old? Not quite 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's 2004, I think. So
Yeah, so not quite 20 years ago, but pretty close. And I rewatched it again, and you're right. It's absolutely hilarious the way they do the subtlety of that first day, where you see things happening out of the corner of your eye or out of the corner of his eye, and he's just not registering it. And it's a great commentary on the blissful ignorance that most people have when they're stuck inside their own head, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, I I have no problem with I have no problem with it being on your top 10 whatsoever. In fact, I'm glad it's there because it should be represented. To me, it's just not something that I'm going to go back and rewatch. And it's I think that's what all my top 10 have in common is that I just I can't wait to go and rewatch these ones. And with Shaun of the Dead, it's kind of like, well, I saw it and I enjoyed it, but that's about it for me. So
that's understandable. I mean, I felt that way about a couple of your choices. So I mean, it was only right that you return the favor. So
I think though that I think there's a lot of Shaun of the Dead fans out there. So it's
yeah.
probably I think popular opinion is on your side for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably venture that much like your cabin in the woods argument, I think mine would be for Shaun of the Dead. Just switch the roles. So
There you go.
yeah. So with that, let's move to number 4.
All right, my number 4 is what I would consider a movie that's been a favorite of mine for a long time, um, and it falls into that category of gateway horror movie as well. So this is a movie that I was actually able to show my kids not so long ago, and so really it is probably more of a comedy than a straight up horror, but I think it does it in the best way possible. And this is 1990s Tremors. Um, Probably also the only monster movie type horror comedy on this list, unless I'm completely forgetting something. But this, of course, stars Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward, and even more, of course, probably Michael Gross and Reba McEntire. Uh, their two characters are probably the funniest part of this whole movie. Just how prepared they are for an attack by underground, alien like digging slugs or whatever these graboids actually are, right? Um,
Yeah. I think I remember from that they were like some prehistoric worm that got revived, but maybe I'm misremembering something.
yeah, that sounds about right. Actually,
Yeah.
worm was the word that was evading me there for a bit. So thank you.
Yeah.
Um, it's also an interesting horror movie from the perspective that I think it takes place almost exclusively in the daylight and in a desert setting. So it's pretty. I hesitate to say groundbreaking because that's pretty cheesy, but it is unique that way, and the design of the graboids is brilliant. Like they couldn't be any more impressive, I think, when you first see them come out of the ground like that. And the fact that Tom Woodruff Jr., who had previously, well, is a pretty famous makeup guy. Uh, the fact that he was actually inside one of those worm costumes coming through the ground like that, is kind of a behind the scenes piece of info that makes it even more fun to watch. But the strength of this movie is on the strength of the characters as well. The Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward characters, the chemistry between those two is great, and it's just a situation that you don't know how you would react unless it happened to you, and it's fun watching this movie unfold. It's just a lot of fun, this movie, and I think that's that's what a big part of the horror comedy should be.
Nice. I can't say I'm as big a fan, but I really like that one as well. I mean, not enough to make my list, but I do really enjoy it, and I have a lot of fun with it. I even really like a lot of the sequels, so definitely a much more fun film than I really like it. So yeah, great choice there.
All right, how about your number four?
So my number four is what we've talked about earlier. I went with Evil Dead 2.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm not interested in the is it a remake or is it a sequel debate. I I appreciate this much more just in the sense of this was hysterical from beginning to end. I mean, you mentioned Bruce's physical comedy in this. Some of the stuff that he does is just I have no idea how he came out of that and is still a functioning, how he still has functioning joints at some point.
Yep.
Um, yeah, there's no end to just some of the outlandish physical comedy that he does. And then some of the jokes are, I mean, I really wouldn't say they're jokes, but like, physical gags and slapstick that goes on in this. It is so much fun. Yeah, I can't say much more about it. It's one of my all-time favorites. So, I was much more like you. I kind of was debating whether or not Army of Darkness fell close enough. So, yeah, I did the same thing as you, and because I thought this one was a much truer mixture of the two, I went with this one. But um, yeah, uh, Evil Dead 2 is just so much fun.
Yeah, I think I had briefly considered doing a kind of cheating a bit and saying Evil Dead 2 slash Army of Darkness, but I wanted to stick to the what I think the rules of the top 10 were. But um, and I did just rewatch Army of Darkness last night just to have a fresher opinion of it. Still a great movie, still very funny. Um, but I think Evil Dead 2 is the right choice. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I was debating about it just for myself because I'm just as much a fan of Army of Darkness as I am Evil Dead 2. But just like we said, for the purposes of this, because Evil Dead 2 feels more like a genuine horror film, I kind of went in that direction. But I would have no qualms adding Army of Darkness to this either. So,
Very cool.
all right. So that moves to number three.
Moving right along here. All right. Um, okay. So my number three pick is one that I said I would get back to later, and that is Tucker and Dale versus Evil.
Nice.
I have to say that even of all of these top 10 movies, this is the one that I probably laughed the most in. And and that's obviously very important in a horror comedy, but um, you're right. The way that they set everything up in the first half, it's just so brilliant how they can make such innocent gestures by these two guys look so sinister if you don't know if it's viewed in a different context. And I mean, it took a lot of skill to come up with those ideas, I think. um, for me, if the second half of the movie had been as perfect as the first half of the movie, then this would have been my number one choice, and it probably wouldn't have been close. But I do think the second half uh, is not as strong as the first, and especially on a rewatch, I definitely got that feeling. But just on the strength of how funny the concept and the execution of the first half of this movie is, this is my number three for sure.
All right. That moves to my number three. Again, this was another film that I fell in love with the first time I saw. Um, I unfortunately cannot say that I've seen the full version of this one. I can't. I would actually say a lot of us haven't actually. My number three is Dead Alive.
I had a feeling this one might be on your list, actually.
Yeah. Well, I only say that because real briefly before I talk about the film, the version that we know of, I should say most of the Western world would know of as Dead Alive, is actually a cut version. The uncut version is a version that is known as Brain Dead, and
Okay.
I
Yeah,
yeah
I didn't know the difference between the two titles. I knew there were two titles, but
yeah Brain Dead is an uncut version. I think there's like 5 or 6 minutes extra.
yeah.
Yeah. I don't know much, but I know that there's a longer tea time sequence. I
Okay.
know, yeah, I know that there's a longer tea time sequence, and I think my memory's fading me here. I think the conception of Merwin is actually on screen.
Okay.
Um, like I said again, I don't know for sure, but I think there's a little bit more than that. But
It's hard to imagine there being much more to the the version I watched. I mean, this is I'm sure you're going to get to this, but this is one of the goriest movies I think I've ever seen.
yeah, for me, it's yeah. I mean, it's probably, I would say, at least in the top five. But yeah, this was a film that I fell in love with. The setup, briefly, because I think we haven't mentioned that at all, is a young guy who's living with his mother. He's henpecked. He's under her control. Mama's boy, basically. He ends up and finds out that she's been bitten by a. I always forget. It's not the Skull Island. It's
Sumatra, maybe is that it?
oh, right, right, right. Yeah. The mother is bitten by a Sumatran rat. So, like I said, I was thinking they find it on Skull Island. That's why I was kind of getting confused. But what happens is, as she succumbs to the virus, she ends up turning into a flesh-eating zombie, but spreads the virus throughout her community, forcing him to have to defend, the zombies from the others who are trying to, figure out what's going on, because dealing with the zombies means that he's acting a little more unhinged and offbeat than usual. And there's a few other subplots that are going on, but basically this is a wall-to-wall display of some of the finest low budget gore you've ever seen. I am not I am not kidding when I say that there is a literal sequence where he takes a lawnmower, revs it up, sticks it on his chest, blades out so the blades are facing away from him, and he walks through a swarm of zombies. And I'll say that again. He walks through a swarm of zombies with a running lawnmower. Do the math. And that's not even touching the tip of the iceberg on this one. But it's not just the voluminous display of gore on display. I mentioned earlier, I think the name is Merwin or Berwin or something like that. It's something like that. But the first time that you see this little thing, you are going to you're going to double over laughing, because it I can't even explain it. I can't explain it. But the sequence where we see him is just I don't understand how anybody can see this and not fall over laughing, especially if you're a parent, because I think that just adds so much to the sequence. Seeing that happen as a parent, you know, I mean, I think you can speak to that more than I can, seeing as how I unfortunately have yet to have a child. But I can't imagine what you saw when you first saw that, and then looking at it, seeing what goes on in that sequence through the eyes of a parent.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, you don't see many movies that take that subject matter on like that for sure. And it's funny because when you do have kids, there's a lot of horror movies that become a lot more uncomfortable to watch. But for the scene like that, it was just so funny that, and it's so um, over the top that you can't help but laugh at it, whether you have kids or not. So
yeah,
um,
but
yeah,
yeah.
you
Oh, go ahead.
wall to wall gore, quite literally. Um,
Hmm.
but,
Yeah.
so yeah, like I said, I had a feeling this might be on your list because one of the I've I've listened to I think all of your episodes so far. Your very first one, you went through your favorite movies, and I know this was on there, so I
Hmm.
I figured it might show up again. Um, and I think for that reason, more than anything else, I kept it in my honorable mentions. It was it's tough for me to um, think where you know I'm pretty happy with my top 10, but Brain Dead slash Dead Alive is very worthy as well.
Nice. So that just leaves our terrible twos. So what's your number two pick?
My terrible number two is definitely more of a comedy than a horror. It's definitely a comedy with horror aspects to it, but to me, it's one of my favorite comedies of all time, and that is 1984's Ghostbusters. Um, Again, this is a gateway movie. I had no trouble showing it to my kids. I remember when I was a kid and I first watched it, that scene with the librarian right at the beginning um, is so scary when you're young and still impressive to watch when you're older and can appreciate it. But um, it's followed by the amazing reactions of Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Harold Ramis as they're running away from it. That it takes the edge off. And when you think about everything that happens in this movie, I mean, most people will see this as a comedy and barely a horror. But when you think about what actually happens, there's some horrific things happening, but they're done in such a way that it's light and it's funny, and the performance of the characters is so. I mean, I can't say enough about those three guys. And Ernie Hudson also always gets the short end of the stick as the fourth Ghostbuster. I don't know why there's four Ghostbusters. Come on, guys. But just how funny Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Harold Ramis are in their roles. I could watch this movie probably a million times and still find it funny. Um, Sigourney Weaver and Rick Moranis as well. Like, I don't know. I don't feel like I need to really give a synopsis for this movie. It's I think everybody knows what it is, but you know, um, the fact that these guys set up a ghost hunting service in the middle of New York and just in time to deal with all these ghost sightings and the timely appearance of Gozer at the top of this particular apartment building. It's I just have so much fun with this one. Um, yeah, I don't know what else to say. It's Ghostbusters, 1984.
Yeah, it's honorable mention for me just for what you said. I find it more comedy than horror, even though, yeah, I do agree that the general outline is very horror based, and a lot of the stuff is, straight horror if you think about it in, like a literal sense of what's going on. But yeah, I find it just, I find it more comedy than anything. So I didn't put it on my main list, but because you can still look at it and say, okay, yeah, if you just tweak one or two things and you drop the jokes, it's a horror film. So I left it as an honorable mention, but yeah, I'm not mad at that at all. That's yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So my terrible two. Although, before I mention this, I should give a slight little warning here and say, even though I'm naming this as my number two, I don't literally think of it as my number two. I actually think of this as my number one. And when I get to my number one, I'll explain what I mean by that. But I will say, for my official choice, it is What We Do in the Shadows.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. Um, like I said, I'll mention what I mean by my number one and not my number two then. But and I when I say What We Do in the Shadows, I'm to the film, not the show. Um, it helps. The show, the canon and legacy of the show helps, but in reference to the movie, this was another one that the second I saw it, I was just in love with it, and the care, the detail, the attention to the lore that went on, I loved it, and a lot of it was, people that got it, people that knew, like we were saying with Sean about people that knew zombie films. These are people that knew vampire films, and they knew a lot of the lore. They knew a lot of the little inside quirks and tricks, and they got a lot of that right. And then they wrapped it up with one of the most enthralling setups I've ever seen. I wouldn't care at all if they weren't vampires. If they were just a bunch of loons that thought they were, and they were just regular people that went about their lives, I'd still follow them. That's, how much fun I think this group is. The four of them together are just absolute gold. And everything about it just I love. And then you threw the werewolves involved, or I should say the swearwolves, not werewolves, not swearwolves. This made me laugh so amazingly well, and I I I cannot stop laughing at this movie. My number two is What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh, there's a very simple reason why this one is not on my list, and that's because I haven't seen it yet.
Ooh.
When I did my research and I started listing all the movies I could think of, I also went to about 5 or 6 different online lists of people ranking their favorite horror comedies. There were a handful that showed up on every list, and What We Do in the Shadows was one of those. Unfortunately, it's not something that's readily available to stream in Canada, and so when I was talking about how frustrating that is from my perspective, this is one of those movies that I really wish
Mm,
I'd been able to see before this.
uh,
But I'm glad you have it on here. I'm glad to hear it's so high because it had piqued my interest given how often I had seen mention of it. So I'm definitely going to go that extra mile and probably rent it, which is something that only happens occasionally for me these days.
cool. Are you at all familiar with the series? Does that air up there, or?
Um, I can't say that I am actually. Is it any question I ask about it will probably betray how unfamiliar I am with it. So I guess the answer to that is no.
Okay. Okay, so the series is it's it's the same setup. So I mean, I assume you know what the general outline of the film is, that it's a film crew following a group of vampires living in the city, correct?
Right.
Okay, yeah. So what happens is basically follows the group in like more intimate detail. So instead of like the film will basically like show them as like one day and then it'll like flash back. The show will actually be the entire day. So instead of, like jump cutting around, so that way, it tells time, a lot quicker. This one will actually spend a lot of the time going in depth, and it'll show like their day to days in like more detail and stuff like that. So that's kind of like the main difference, but it's basically like the same setup. It's a documentary crew that's following them around the city and their daily lives and stuff like that.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely intrigued now because I'd love to know what you guys think of it.
Yeah, well, again, if we can get a hold of it, which I mean, a $5 rental fee is not terrible, but with everything that's available out there streaming, it's got to be a very intriguing movie to actually go to your way to rent. So I got to say, I'm intrigued enough to go to my way to rent it. So I will let you know.
Cool. Yeah. All right. So, that brings us to our final choices. So, let's see what number one is.
Dun, da, da, da. All right. I know your reaction to Return of the Living Dead, and so I'm wondering if you'll have the same reaction to this one. Um, I don't. I think you'll agree with me the quality of the movie because I know I've heard it on one of your lists before. Um, but I mean, I see it as there being very definite black comedy involved here as well. And so this is a movie that I've loved for a long time. I've been fortunate enough to go to a horror convention and get pictures with the cast and autographs and all that stuff. One of my favorite horror actresses is in this movie. It's just completely over the top. It is 1985's Reanimator.
Hmm.
So the so like I said, it's black comedy. It's trying to beat death. It's doing the same action over and over again and expecting a different result, but at the end of the day, trying to beat death is not going to work out too well for you. So the the, the things that happen in here, um, I'm thinking specifically with someone walking around with his own severed head and causing all sorts of mischief. I'm thinking of, well, I mean, the characters themselves, not, I should say, it's very specific characters are just played over the top. And Jeffrey Combs as Herbert West is amazing. Um, Bruce Abbott is the straight guy in this whole thing. Obviously, Barbara Crampton, um, like I said, is one of my favorite horror actresses. It's it's just it's just so over the top. You can't you can't help but not take it seriously. I don't know if that makes sense, but the fact that everything goes wrong when these guys are trying to further they're trying to find out how to beat death. This Herbert West guy has a serum that if you inject it into the brain of a recently deceased corpse, then you'll get some brain activity and some reanimation. Um, but when that happens, it does not happen the way they want it to, and so it's kind of violently funny, and it's gorily funny. It's a very gory movie as well. Um, Based on a H.P. Lovecraft story. Though I heard that H.P. Lovecraft wasn't too impressed with his own story here. It was just something he was doing for a paycheck. I don't know how true that is, but to me, it's a great idea. It's something that we all, at one time or another, would be an interesting question to ask ourselves. Just how far would we go to, hold on to those people that were near and dear to us, but who died too soon. If you had a glowing serum in your hand and you knew that the chances of it working out well for you were pretty terrible, would you still try it? So um, it's not something that you should necessarily get too deeply into. It's a crazy ride from start to finish, um, and one that I've loved for a long time. So it is my number one pick, Reanimator.
Nice. Again, yeah. Unfortunately, I'm kind of same mindset. It's outlandish, yes, but I don't really find it like as like gut bustingly funny. I mean, if you've heard my list, you'll know that it's one of my top five favorite films of all time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, uh, I can't really fault it. It's just one that I when I look at comedy, I'm not like falling down laughing at it. So, I mean, like, it's kind of one of those where I don't really think of it as one, but I can definitely see where a lot of it would be because, like you said, it's so outlandish and over the top that I'm not mad at it, but it's just one, for myself, I wouldn't think of doing it.
Well, I mean, I'm glad that we do have diverging opinions on some of these because it does make for a more interesting. When you put the list side by side, it's more interesting. That we've only had, I think, two crossovers, right? Um, though I
Well,
don't know what's coming in at number one, but
um, yeah, we had, I think we tied on Evil Dead 2 and Tucker and Dale, and then I think you had I had Ghostbusters as an honorable mention. So, like I said, I think we tied on two officially, but there was three crossovers.
gotcha, gotcha. Yeah,
Oh wait,
I
no,
haven't.
wait, three. We both did Deathgasm. There was three. That's right.
Oh, that's right, that's right.
Yeah.
And I had Brain Dead slash Dead
Yeah.
Alive as an honorable mention as well.
All right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so if we include honorable mentions, there's all sorts of crossovers actually, because I
Yeah.
had Shaun of the Dead in there as well. But
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
So, well, I'm interested to see where you're going to go with this one now. So, number one.
Okay. Yeah. So, like I said earlier, with what we do in the shadows, I don't think of that as my number two. I think of what we do in the shadows as my number one. So, I do officially say what we do in the shadows is the funniest horror film I've ever seen. But for the purposes of lists, I say my number one is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Okay, interesting.
Uh, the majority for that, and this is kind of one of the weird. This is the weirdest reasoning ever. I give it just because of its legacy. It was the first one, if not the first one to do so. It was one of the first ones that got it right, and that to me is important because one, it sets the groundwork for what's to come, but it's also important because the film is hysterical on its own, even without the historical significance tied to it. But because of the historical significance, I have to give it credit and put it on the list just because. So even though I say it's number one, it's not technically my true number one. If I was to be honest and say, where it would be if I ranked them, it would probably be, maybe like an 8 or a 9, just because, I do like a lot of the other stuff more. But because of its historical significance, I say it's my number one. So it's one of the few times where I do say something like that because I don't normally do that, but for this case, it's one that I make an exception for. So,
That's intriguing. I think I'm about to have my horror podcast license revoked because I got to admit I have not seen that movie.
hmm,
It's something I have to something I have to do is go back and fill in the gaps of the classics. And this was one that was on my list after going through the research. And again, it was just one that I didn't get a chance to get to watch for this show. Um, but yeah,
yeah,
heard a
I
lot of good things.
yeah. I mean, for me, it's a little. I'm a little bit more familiar just because I kind of grew up with the two of them. So a lot of what I find funny is because of the historical recognition that I have with them, because I'm familiar with them, not just in the movie, but because my parents exposed me to them when I was a lot younger, so I knew who they were when I first saw it. So that kind of has a little to do with it, but in general, because of it was the first one, because it was the one that set it up for proving the two genres can work together without it being campy, without it being silly, without it just what it a lot of what goes on with this one is knowledge of what came before, so I can't really go much in depth with it. But because of, a lot of those factors, I do say that it is number one, just because it's historically important and it's a good enough movie that I genuinely and I'd honestly have it on my list. But like I said, if I was being honest and accurate, it would be higher up on the list. It would probably be like I said, like an 8 or a 9. But because of all these other mitigating factors, it's my number one.
That makes sense. I
Yeah.
mean, it's it's funny how, I mean, I love top 10 lists. I love taking them seriously and really doing the homework and like flipping them up and down and moving things around up until the last minute. Um, it's so funny how we set our own rules for these,
Yeah.
and you know, I I think we did a great job tonight of covering really a lot of the corners of the horror comedy genre. Like I think we came at it from slightly different perspectives in some cases, but I mean, I would happily recommend anything that you have on your list to anybody else as well. So
Yeah. I mean, like I said, we cross on 4 films. There are 3 additional ones that are honorable mentions of some kind. So yeah, I mean, we have a lot of unique titles, a lot of ones that are interesting for people to check out if they haven't done so. So yeah, I can't say I was disappointed with this. So yeah, this was definitely a fun time, and I'm glad we got to do this.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, this is officially my first guest spot on a podcast other than my own. So this was very cool. I appreciate the opportunity to be on here.
I'm glad to break your cherry, so to speak. So yeah, so yeah, you mentioned your show. So before we leave, have any let listeners know where they can find you and your work.
Okay. First thing I want to ask though, do we want to go through any additional honorable mentions, or do you think we've got it covered? What do you think?
I mean, there's probably maybe only one or two that I would want to mention. If I would probably want to honorable mention anything, it would probably be Idle Hands. I was kind of debating whether or not that one would make it, but it just kind of like fell off at the last minute. And then again, like I said, I had Leslie Vernon and Ghostbusters as honorable mentions, but um, I will say, even though I mean, I know both of us said it was not horror enough, I would still say it's worth watching to check out Army of Darkness,
Mhm.
just because it is the most comedy of the three, and especially under the parameters of saying it's a horror comedy, I think it should still be looked at, even though we both agree that part two is the true one that mixes the two the best. If you're looking for horror comedy, I think that one probably does it better. It's just I like you said, it's just not enough of a horror to make it, but it's still, I would say, worth mentioning.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had um, another one that sort of is a love letter to slashers. I had The Final Girls in my honorable mentions. Um, that's one that I had a lot of fun with, and a surprisingly deep story to it emotionally as well. Slither was one that came up. I crazy over the top gore, great performances by Michael Rooker and Elizabeth Banks, and Nathan Fillion for that matter. That one was probably the closest to making it on my list. And just to round it out, we'll say from the under the radar category, there's a movie from 2006. It's a UK movie called Severance, and that the first act is has the feeling of trying a bit too hard to be office type, like humor from the Office series, but the last half of it really packs a punch and goes in some directions that were not expected. So that's also something that if you ever get a chance to see, either yourself, Don, or any of the listeners out there. That's one that I had a lot of fun with too.
Cool. All right. So yeah. Let listeners know where they can find you.
All right. Well, yeah. So as we talked about at the beginning of the show, I am 1/3 of the Watch Out Horror Movie Review podcast. You can find us. Our website is almost ready. Potentially by the time you hear this, it might be there. Otherwise, it might just be a blue screen that says coming soon. But that will be watchouthorror.com. You can find us on Twitter at watchouthorror, on Instagram at watchouthorrorcast. We also have a link tree at linktr.ee/watchouthorror. Yeah, we've been around for about a year now. Well, a little less than a year, maybe 10 months. And what we try to do is provide reviews and recommendations spoiler free. I mean, I love listening to horror podcasts, but I tend to avoid the ones where I haven't seen the movies yet. So we wanted to make a podcast where you can feel safe to come and listen to some debates about movies that you might be interested in seeing without having all the beans spilled for you. So that's what we try to do over at Watch Out Horror. Yeah, that's about it for me.
All right. Yeah. I can say as a proud supporter of hundreds of shows, I really appreciate the spoiler-free formula. So, yeah, definitely keep that going. I'm a big fan of it, and you guys are really fun together. I really like the back and forth dynamic you guys have. So, I mean, yeah, I'm not just sucking up to you because you're a guest. I'm being genuine here. So, yeah,
Well,
yeah, I'm a big fan of what you guys do. So.
I'm very happy to hear that. Very honored, actually, and yeah, I can't wait to tell my co-host that. And I wanted to publicly thank you as well, Don, because what you do every day by retweeting that list of horror podcasts that come out, like that was when we first launched and we dipped our toe into the vast Twitterverse. There's a lot of horror podcasts out there, and I saw you putting out these lists every day, and I was like, wow, I wonder how I get on that thing. And turns out it was very easy. The service that you do by making sure that everybody hears about all these horror podcasts every day, I can't imagine it's a small time commitment. So I on behalf of all the other horror podcasts out there want to thank you for that effort.
Yeah, my problem, my pleasure. I mean, like I say, I'm just happy to help out. I mean, we're all in this together. We all have the same love. We all have the same general outlook. So why not? But yeah, like I said, I'm just happy to help out. So
Well,
uh, yeah,
it's appreciated for sure.
yeah, no, you're welcome. So yeah, that will close up the show for this evening. Thank you again for joining me. This was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate it.
Oh well, thanks for having me on. This was great. I love top 10 lists and I love horror comedies, so this was the place to be.
All right. You can find all of the links in the show notes below. I will have everything there for you to check out. So go ahead and follow them if you can. Until next time for another list, I will see you then. Bye.